Hey agents, it's Dispatch. Today we're getting into the problems with LMGs in the Division 2. That's light machine guns. Almost no one who plays this game seriously uses an LMG as their optimal setup. Let's figure out why and how we can fix the issue. Let's get stuck into it. Let's step through each of the problems with LMGs. Number 1. Suppression. Suppression just doesn't work very well in pretty much any game. In this game, it makes enemies harder to shoot, and you have very little control over who is getting suppressed. In this game, flanking doesn't really work that well. Enemies are so tanky that it's very easy to get counter-flanked, especially in missions where there are tight spaces, and with the plethora of spawn doors in missions and in the open world. LMGs especially don't work because damage to targets out of cover doesn't affect these enemies once they're in cover and suppressed, and damage to targets out of cover doesn't aid skill damage, so it has no synergy for you if you were to do an explosive build with an LMG, for example. Suppression isn't without its benefits. It stops incoming fire for a time, and any incoming fire that does come your way is much less accurate. It roots enemies in place, making them easy targets for skills like explosives. However, this is really hard to capitalize on due to other issues. Most players would rather just kill the enemies before they're suppressed rather than having them stuck in place by suppression. Problem number 2. LMGs have middling DPS. This just speaks for itself. Most are worse than ARs, so why would you take an LMG with all the other drawbacks? As we can see from the mag DPS, including damage to targets out of cover but not including damage to health, the AK series is outperforming most of the LMGs in sustain and burst mag DPS. Even then, most of the ARs are hanging tight with the LMGs in terms of sustained DPS. I don't have Iron Lung or Blue Screen in this table, but those are two of the best LMGs, and we're not really looking to buff those in this case. Problem number 3. The reloads on most LMGs are so long that a rusher can straight up just come up to you and kill you while you're reloading. It's annoying, especially in this game. Problem number 4. Handling. The LMGs seem to have higher horizontal recoil variance than other weapon types. This is also reflected in the reticle, which is a box with no point in the center. Horizontal recoil is already impossible to fully control and is random, but with ARs and SMGs it at least follows a general direction with slight deviations. LMGs, however, will recoil left and right very heavily, which can throw out the shots of even seasoned agents who are aim labs enthusiasts. In addition, the spread of the weapon starts large and gets smaller as you fire, which means your first couple of shots are more likely to miss. Even if you don't end up suppressing the enemy in the first couple of bullets, those bullets are the most important to hit in order to stagger the enemy. In addition, sometimes you only have a brief window of opportunity, such as an enemy moving cover to cover or standing up out of cover, and in these instances you're not going to hit those critical shots. Due to the way cover and suppression works, by the time you get your optimal handling, none of the enemies will be in your line of sight to shoot. 5. The final and most important issue with LMGs is that they can't use a shield. This is the best skill in the game. If you have questions on why the shield is so good, see the description. So let's talk about how Massive might solve these issues. I think the issue comes down to suppression at its core. Suppression determines the identity of LMGs in the Division 2. Suppression seems to be tied to damage and rate of fire. I was trying to run an explosive build to make use of the suppression mechanic. Suppression would keep the enemies in place for easy explosive skill damage. The concept worked, but not well enough for it to be a usable build. Running lots of skill tiers reduced my damage and it was very hard for me to suppress the enemies. You'll find, however, if you run an all-red build with Frenzy on your LMG, it seems like you suppress every enemy at once, almost instantly. If this concept of suppression is how it's supposed to work in game, I think it should change slightly. Each enemy should have a suppression meter above it when you start to suppress them that shows how far they are to being fully suppressed, and the suppression ability of LMGs should be dialed up by a lot. Unfortunately, this would relegate LMGs to suppression only, almost like in real life. This would potentially completely change the way combat unfolds in the division. Now it would be about establishing your LMG base of fire and punishing with skills and or flanking. This would be very tricky to balance and be questionable as to how one would differentiate between different LMGs, since their only purpose would be suppression. In the end, most groups would probably resort to just trying to kill the enemy rather than dealing with the janky suppression mechanic. The next idea would be removing or greatly reducing suppression. This is an okay, if uninspired idea. Let's talk about some others. Dodd, a fellow content creator, had an idea for blow-through with LMGs, so rounds could pass through one enemy into another. This code already exists in the game for the TAC-50, so it isn't outlandish. However, in my opinion, this should be an option for most weapons right out of the gate anyway as an ammo or mag type. The next idea would be to make suppression a status effect, so it triggers other status effect talents. So if you wanted to suppress the whole area, for example, you could run Creeping Death or something like Eclipse. A bit weird, but whatever. All of these suppression ideas really make LMGs a super unique weapon type, and I think they might be a bit too wild. Either they'll be too strong or too weak. Another safer idea is that LMGs simply stagger sooner or for longer than ARs and SMGs, allowing for more damage to be done and preventing them from getting to cover. Or maybe suppressed enemies show more of their hitbox. This wouldn't really make sense from a real world perspective, but it would help with gameplay. Another idea is that suppressed enemies take more damage from all sources. Alright, if you couldn't tell due to the high number and low quality of the ideas above, I'm just not really sure what the right answer is. The easiest would probably be just to tone down suppression and not upend any of the existing gameplay mechanics in the game. Next, let's tackle the next important issue. They can't be used with shields. Now, you might expect, contrarian that I am, that I would suggest the devs allow us to use shields with LMGs. Ha! No! Although, that did give me an idea. What if there was a shield that sat atop any weapon and was able to be used in cover? Kind of like Blackbeard in Rainbow Six Siege. Make it super weak or whatever, but have it just give you a tiny bit of extra survivability. Alright, with that lofty idea out of the way, I think shields not mixing with LMGs is perfectly fine. However, because of this, the damage of LMGs needs to be increased. Surprise, surprise. If you're going to give up the immense survivability of a shield, it needs to do a ton of damage. You need to be able to kill things quickly, otherwise you're just shooting exposed without a shield to protect you. In most games, if LMGs do more burst DPS than ARs, then the two classes of weapons start to lose their identity, and LMGs just become better ARs. With the shield involved in Division 2, however, I don't think this would happen. In addition, I think the handling needs to be looked at. LMGs can fire for a long time, and constantly having to correct for left-right deviations gets pretty tiring. I think we either need less left-right recoil, or make it predominantly recoil in one direction, or reduce it drastically but trade off accuracy, or make stability attributes reduce horizontal recoil like with rifles. It just sucks that you can miss so many shots right at the beginning of an engagement when the window of opportunity is the greatest. These weapons also have a longer optimal range than ARs, so it would be nice if we could actually make use of that. If this change is made, it'll have to be balanced with the damage a bit so they don't become overpowered, but that would go a long way to make them feel better to use. I know for a fact the two LMGs that I find most enjoyable and effective to use are the Blue Screen and the Iron Lung, simply because they seem to handle better. Alright, time for the final problem. A personal problem I have with LMGs. Why isn't there an M27 IAR in the game? I know it's basically a heavy assault rifle for all intents and purposes, but so are the RPK and L86. I need a mag-fed LMG that looks cool for Pete's sake. Huge missed opportunity, and there are only two of them in the game anyway, so we could use another. Whew. Just to recap. Suppression, DPS, handling, and not being able to use a shield are huge issues with LMGs that need to be fixed to make these weapons viable. I'd say suppression needs to be reduced or overhauled, recoil needs to be decreased, and damage needs to be increased to give these weapons any chance of being on par with ARs. What do you think? Are LMGs secretly meta and I'm just a JTF hobo who can't tell his ass from his elbow? Let me know in the comments and we'll see if we can drum up some even better ideas. Don't forget to subscribe. Unlike $5 footlongs, this sub is completely free. Whatever happened to those? They weren't even a foot long, and they haven't been $5 for like a decade. Anyway, also remember to hit that thumbs up so we stay in the algorithm and Isaac's good graces. Thanks for learning with me, agents. Until next time, this has been Dispatch. Take care out there.